the BGreen Media Literacy Project. We're here today to talk about global ecology and the human connection, and our featured organization is Mothers Out Front. Our guests today are Madeleine Charney, who's the Sustainability Studies Librarian at University of Massachusetts Amherst, and a member of Mothers Out Front that is also our featured organization for this episode. And we also have Dr. Laura Lovett, who's from the Department of History at University of Massachusetts Amherst. And hopefully today we'll have a great conversation that connects the human connections with issues of climate change and environmental challenges that is happening globally and locally. And hopefully we'll be able to get a really good historical perspective on understanding the way women have always been involved in environmental movements and issues that have not always been as well documented as say the counterparts of movements that have been led by men. So let's start talking with our guests, and we'd like to know a little bit about each of you. So Madeleine, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, it would be really great.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to frame that answer as we do in Mothers Out Front. We use a storytelling model called public narrative, which was developed by Marshall Gantz, who's a public policy professor at the Harvard Kennedy Business School. So in less than 2 minutes, I would like to share that I'm a second generation environmentalist. I'm the daughter of an earth science teacher, and I grew up with a compost pile and solar panels on our roof. So that instilled a deep reverence in me of the natural world and thinking in systems. I went on to become a librarian. I love information. I love gathering it and sharing it. But about 10 years into my career, I felt a sort of lack of depth, and I went back and got a second master's in sustainable landscape design from the Conway School in Conway, Massachusetts, and I wound up at UMass and focusing on sustainability studies across the curriculum. And all was going well. I thought, well, I'm empowering my students to go forth and be good stewards and with information to boost their process of learning and faculty with their teaching. But once I became a parent myself, I realized I need to do more myself as my own moral imperative to help to mitigate climate change. And that's when I found Mothers Out Front, and it really has been a turning point for me of feeling like I've found my voice and a way to make a difference.
That's great. So Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Unlike Madeleine, I did not grow up with a compost pile, but I had grandparents who lived in the country, and I would get sent to their farm to help work in the summers, and they did have a compost pile because there was nothing else around. And I think what that meant was, for me, I started to think about history. It was almost like getting sent back to the 19th century every summer. And I started to think about how much history matters and how much we can learn from sort of thinking about sort of older ways of doing things or previous ideas. And I became a historian because I really do believe that if we understand the past and if we really take it for what it is, we really allow ourselves to explore from multiple perspectives, we can really make change in the future. And so my own work looks at women and children. Mm-hmm. My first book looks at the history of reproduction and pronatalism in the United States and policies that are underwritten by an assumption about motherhood and women and children that we may not think of as having that kind of demographic and reproductive focus. I've also been doing some work on the history of children and youth, and I did a book on the history of a movement in the 1970s to really empower children to make changes in their lives and women in their lives by reimagining gender roles. It was based on the popular children's television song and songbook and a record called Free to Be You and Me. And so I really looked at what did it mean to use play to reimagine roles and possibilities. And whenever I would speak with my students about that, they always thought it was just brand new. You know, for them, it's so exciting to uncover these movements and moments of real, I think, genuine possible imagination of things changing. Mm-hmm. And it's so exciting to be able to realize that went on and I think continues to influence us.
Great. So thank you for being here, and hopefully we'll have a pretty great discussion on combining history and women's movements, and specifically the work of Mothers Out Front right now in the context of the global emerging issues and challenges related to environmental degradation and climate change and global warming, whatever you may call it. But it's here and it's around us, and we just have different community members mobilizing in ways that they think is worthwhile and valuable. And hopefully we'll get to know a little bit about your organization and your work. So tell us a little bit about the history and context of Mothers Out Front in general. And also, Laura, I would love to know, and I'm sure the viewers would really love to know about the trajectory of women's movements and international women's movements as it relates to environment, and how exactly that has sort of grown, and how it has charted out its path and way throughout the years.
Shall I begin?
Yeah.
Okay, well, first to say Mothers Out Front is very new. And it was started in a living room of some Boston women back in 2013. And since then, in just one short year or so, we have had 140 house parties. That's how we introduce people to the organization. So this is Massachusetts-based. And that means over 1,000 people have gotten familiarized with the structure of Mothers Out Front, and we have a mailing list of almost 2,000 people that get a weekly email. So whenever I start talking about the group, I often ask my audience, has anyone heard of this group before? And more hands are shooting up when I put that question out to my audiences. So it's a very wisely structured organization. Like I said, Marshall Gantz was consulted, and his whole training network to put the pieces into place. It was all very intentional, and it works on the snowflake model. So it is not non-hierarchical. Everyone in a community organizing team, of which I'm a part here in the Pioneer Valley, has a lateral role. And it's just very sort of a flat way of doing things, and everyone does what they can. And I mean, one way that I like to explain it is that no matter how little time you think you have, if you clear a little bit of space, even a busy working parent can do one thing. And our main campaign right now is asking people to switch their household to a third-party electricity provider called Mass Energy. And by doing that, you're greening the grid. So we're drawing from renewable resources and using wind or a mix of solar, wind, methane, and hydro. So you're greening the grid, but you're also sending a message to our politicians that there is a demand for renewable resources over fossil fuel.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about the historical trajectory of women's work like this over the years based on your research.
So the place I would start is actually about 100 years ago. We are looking at, we're sort of marking the anniversary of World War I. And as World War I began to arise on the horizon, women began to actively organize against it. And it was the first all-women's political organization that was international. A group called the Women's Peace Party was founded in 1914 by Crystal Eastman. It was expanded in 1915 by Jane Addams. By really the 1916 in the United States, there were 25,000 women going to the White House, to Woodrow Wilson, and saying, please don't engage in this international war. Listen to women for a change. He didn't. The U.S. involved itself in the First World War. And after the war, you had the growth of an international movement. In an international peace conference in 1919, Women's Peace Conference, where they founded the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And the interesting thing about that was this international group had a vision for how to get rid of war. And it was really about educating children. And so like Mothers Out Front, I think, one of the things that they did was they would introduce the impact of war into children's schools and classrooms in the United States and all over the world, really. After the First World War, soldiers who had been through these horrible situations in trenches and gas war would go into classrooms and talk to children about what that experience was like. And the impact of that was that for almost a whole generation, there was a real reluctance to embrace war. It's one of the reasons in the Second World War that the United States was so reluctant to enter. And so I think it was really kind of the inaugural idea that, in fact, women had a different way of imagining what we could do and what needed to be done, and that was connected to an idea of thinking about children. I think Mothers Out Front especially includes children in their parties, and we're at a moment where I think a lot of young people are not necessarily identifying explicitly as environmentalists, but are living as if they were always environmentalists, and as if we all have to be aware of limited resources and how to address change.
So this brings me to my next theme and question, which I talked about a little bit in the introduction. So what do you think, what kind of narratives or counter-narratives do you think women and environmental issues, for example, the approach taken by Mothers Out Front, do you think that what counter-narratives are being brought forward that often gets ignored? If you take a different perspective, like what do you think mothers are bringing to the table specifically into this picture that any other form of social relation will not be able to bring?
Mm-hmm. Well, first let me say that we refer to ourselves as mothers and others. Men are very welcome to join us. People who aren't parents are, everyone, it's all hands on deck right now as far as we're concerned. But having said that, it is mostly mothers that come. And I mean, one way we think about it is as a parent, you're very used to multitasking. And you're doing a lot at once, and yes, we're all busy, but somehow these miraculous things happen. Like we were tabling the other day, to give an example, at the Amherst block party, and we had literature to hand out. We were trying to get people to call DeVal Patrick's office about not investing in fossil fuel, and we were making bird puppets for the climate change march in New York City. And it was just a real sort of tribute to parents working together. We were just passing children off. Some would go off to play, others would take the clipboard. We were just in constant motion, and we got a lot of signatures and a lot of people really excited about our campaign to switch to mass energy. So I think that a parenting mindset is very conducive to getting things done. We're a very practical group, and yet I also want to say that it's very heart-centered. We have twice a month discussion groups. So for people who are drawn also for a need to discuss the feelings, and this is in some ways, very grim topic and difficult one. And I myself was in sort of denial about the whole urgency of it. I just simply couldn't absorb it. It was too painful. But once I met these other families that were able to talk about it, there's like an outlet and a sort of baseline understanding, like we're up against something really tough, but we can do this.
Great. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the women's perspective in your research as well, like how you think or what your research has been in terms of putting forth these narratives that are often underwritten about or underrepresented?
I think, this narrative of re-establishing a long-term vision, of taking politics away from a short-term cycle to really imagining its generational impact, is something that women have often done. In 1961, in the middle of the Cold War, you had the largest march on Washington organized by women, a group called Women's Strike for Peace. And it was a group that was organized by Bella Abzug, who went on to become a congresswoman, and Dagmar Wilson, but it was made up of mothers. And they took their children in strollers and hats and white gloves, and they paraded up and down the White House. And John F. Kennedy, who was sitting in the White House, was watching this. And what they were asking for was the ending of atomic testing, because they had produced evidence. They were looking at evidence that said that strontium-90 was from the fallout of atomic testing, was winding up in mother's milk and in cow's milk that was given to children. And so they really saw, right, that the need to short-term test weapons had a long-term devastating effect on them as women and their children. And in fact, in 1963, Kennedy went on to sign the Atomic Peace Ban Test Ban Treaty, in part because of this movement. 50,000 women in Washington. Some people attribute it with ending the anti-communist House Un-American Activities Committee piece, because how do you fight women who say, we're just here, right, to get you to think about our children, and who show up with children, right, as they did. So I think that call, or the call later, in the 1970s, Lois Gibbs and a group of parents, but including women, helped to organize a protest against the toxic dumping of waste at a small community in upstate New York called Love Canal. And in fact, it was based on the fact that the government was going to build a school on top of, or two schools on top of this waste dump. And they were marking the fact that there was a huge number of miscarriages, that huge numbers of young children were developing leukemia and cancer. And so you really saw, what they saw was the direct connection between, right, the toxic waste, the pollution, the notion that in fact you could just bury chemicals anywhere, and the fact that you can't, because we're humans and we live in this space. And so in fact it was in light of the fight at Love Canal that we got the Superfund Act that mandated that the government, it didn't have to necessarily entirely clear it up, but they had to resettle 800 plus families. And we began to, I think about these long-term environmental degradation issues that impact people all over the world.
That's great. What would you say are the main goals of Mothers Out Front right now? What are the main short-term, let's say, next 2-year plan? What is going on with you guys?
Well, the members of a Boston chapter have met with Deval Patrick 2 times now, last June and recently September 22nd, the day after the People's Climate March. And what we're asking for is an executive order to stop investing in fossil fuel infrastructure for any new energy needs. So that hasn't been completely ironed out yet, but he is very aware of our campaign to do these switches, and he is supportive of it, but the constant response is, I need the numbers. So that is why we feel such a fire under us to get the word out to do these switches. So it's about raising awareness, and it's about, like I said, demonstrating that anyone really can have a voice and that you can show up at a party, learn about it. We show a clip from Bill McKibben's documentary, Do the Math. So we're educating people about the issue. They're meeting each other, and we have an open meeting every Wednesday at All Things Local. Anyone is welcome to come and join us in the planning. And not sure exactly what's next beyond the next time we sit down with Deval Patrick, but it's just keep on spreading the word. And Mass Energy, who we've partnered with, does tours of the wind turbines and the methane digesters that are open to the public. So it's about bringing the public in as well to become more informed.
Great. So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to a more personal zone. We're all really lucky. I think the 3 of us, we were able to pick and choose the direction we want to take in our lives, from my understanding. And some people don't even have that privilege of being able to pick and choose their vocation or what they want to do. So my question to you is, why do you think the 2 of you chose to follow the path that you did? And what are your personal stakes with the idea of global ecology and how it connects with your human experience and your family's human experience? And we'd like to know a little bit about that.
I'll start.
Okay.
Well, as a librarian, I've always been a huge advocate of gathering information, the most authoritative information, and teaching people for over 25 years now how to be empowered by understanding how to do what they're doing, but do it better. So when I work with the students at UMass and around sustainability studies, I see them as burgeoning activists, essentially. So I think of my role as helping sort of put more wind under their sails so that they can speak with more authority and write with more authority and be citing things that are authoritative. So it feels very purposeful to me, but like I said, once I became a parent, it felt like it's not enough. I have to do more. And, personal stakes are protecting my own child and everybody else's child along the way here in my own town and everywhere in the world. And, a very poignant moment for me was recently at my living room, my kitchen table, my husband and I were getting ready to go to this public forum about climate change with our local officials, Ellen Story and Stan Rosenberg, and we tried to keep our conversation, mild in front of our young child, but he's quick and he caught on. If something's going on, and his question to us, which really cut, to my core and my soul, was like, "What if you lose?" He knew there was some kind of fight we were going to, because he saw us, kind of stirred up and getting ready for something. But Mom, Dad, what if you lose? And we can't lose.
Right.
And I've always felt that what I do feels like a calling. Like, I love what I do. I teach, and I'm also a mother, and I don't see a huge difference in the role of those. They're both nurturing roles. They're both roles that are about helping people to develop, right? But not, but nurturing them and helping them to sort of go where they will go. I think for me, the issue, especially of climate change, is one that I personally grappled with at a very young age. I was a thyroid cancer survivor at age 17, and grew up kind of listening to issues of radiation and issues of other people with this kind of increasingly common ailment, and I think it meant that I never took for granted what would come next. I always sort of was excited about what I got to do, but I never took for granted a sort of long-term trajectory. And I realized that meant I lived in a very different way. I always imagined that what you did was the most important thing you had to do that day. And it meant that I realized I come up against a different vision in terms of politics that really is much more, it's longer term. It's more, what do you do in 2 or 3 years, but not what do you do today to make the world different. And so for me, this seemed like a connection that I get to work with young people, whether it's my own children or students on. And I did go to a Mothers Out Front meeting and was so excited by the fact that what they're doing is a concrete effort to really make profound change. So the push for renewable energy, which is one that we all know we have to make, but how can we do it? And I think that they're, concretely, they've got an agenda that is doable, that's clear, that is rooted in, we hope, some of the success that Germany exhibited in making the same kind of push, that it really came from the grassroots up. If you wait for the government, if you wait for the economy to shift, it's not going to happen. But we have to do it. We have to do it. We can't lose.
So I wanted to ask you, both of you, what kind of international angle you can see local movements like Mothers Out Front can develop into, and what kind of collaborations historically there have been that have started from small localities and mushroomed to destinations and cross-national boundaries. So what are some of Mothers Out Front's perspectives and your perspectives on where how there can be more of a community building and community partnership with international actors on people who are doing similar work, and whether you think there's value in that? And what have you seen in your exploration of these topics as to how international networking has either helped or not helped locally based movements? Because in my perspective and in my research, I've seen that making actors from localities and global scenarios connect, making actors from one locality connect with the other, often results in really brilliant results, because you can have a space where you experiment and you learn from one another and learn that things don't work in the same way everywhere. However, certain things do work and can translate, and how do we learn best? And I think we learn best from one another. And but that's just my perspective. Am I being too idealistic about it, or do you think that there is value in this, both of you? Laura, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think of in terms of learning from one another, and I work in the United States. We're one of the 3 or 4 countries economically in the first tier that have no funded resources for parental leave, right? I mean, right?
Yes.
We have no funding for, so we have so much to learn from all over the globe around valuing the way in which, the life that people live affects their entire being, right? And I think that when you start from that issue, when you start from the issue of potential reproduction or potential identity, you have the possibility of really, spanning these very limiting national and even geographically specific issues. We are talking about a globe, and we're talking about the next generations. And if we don't figure out how to root in our own experience, but to cross, we're in trouble. And I think that this really offers that potential to do so, whether it's, creating a test ban treaty or issues of sort of framing peace. We've done it in the past, and we need to do it in the future.
Great.
Well, I have to say I've been so focused on my own state. I haven't given a lot of thought to branching out, but I certainly see the potential. And Massachusetts is already a forerunner in renewable energy, and we still have a lot of work to do. But if we can show our strength more and more, and Mothers Out Front itself is looking to expand into New York pretty soon, and who knows, it could just be spreading all over the country. And with social media at our fingertips, there's a lot of sharing that could happen. And I mean, the emails are flying constantly. I just found out about an organization that works on the federal level with climate change legislature, and that's from a friend that I know in Montana that alerted me to it. And then there's a Western Massachusetts group popping up. So, I mean, I see it already starting to swell in this country, and that's what I'm more aware of. And certainly we have a lot to learn from Europe, and particularly Germany and Holland and Denmark and Scandinavia. And I'm eager to learn more and bring those concepts back home to fuel what we're doing.
We really saw that with the People's Climate March that really happened all over the world. And it was, we have a lot to learn from all places. And it was really, I think, a moment for me with my children and and our signs to see these sort of, images of people in the streets all over the world in massive numbers calling for change.
Fantastic.
And we met on the steps of the Museum of Natural History and with Mothers Out Front. It was exciting to meet our counterparts around the state.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time and coming and talking about this topic that I think is really interesting, because oftentimes climate change and global ecology is talked about in big abstract ways, but I think rarely do we talk about it in the context of actual human specific experiences. And and I'm sure the viewers found your narratives really interesting and refreshing, because you're connecting it to something that everyone can relate to. Most people have mothers, and most people will or do have children. So I think it's really something valuable to talk about. And thank you, Madeleine, and thank you, Laura, and hope you had a great time just like I did.